Thank you for tuning into the S.H.A.R.E podcast, where we talk about sex, relationships, and culture. We want to start off this episode with a trigger warning. This episode is heavy as we talk about sex trafficking during this Sex Trafficking Awareness Month. This episode will touch on topics such as drugs, sexual and domestic violence, and suicide. We do want to give you guys just a heads up so that you know if you need to take a break, if you need to pause the podcast, come back and listen to it, that's okay. And there will be links in the description that if you are going through a situation that's similar, where you can find some help. Welcome back to the S.H.A.R.E podcast, where we talk about sex, relationship, and culture. I am your host, Carl, also joined with my other host,
Kassia.
Yes.
And if you haven't, go listen to our episode from 2 weeks ago. It is fantastic. And our episode today is kind of going to be continuing to talk about that same thing. We have our same guest, Michelle, back. We're very excited about.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but it's such an important conversation. So in our Real Talk podcast, we kind of just want to get to know you better. We want to get to know your story. Are you Hamilton born and raised, or?
I am a Halton girl, so I grew up in Oakville. Yes.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more about specifically your story and how that relates to the topic of sex trafficking that we're talking about this month?
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Michelle. I work at Restoration Second Stage Homes. I'm a peer advocate and outreach facilitator there. Today, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about myself and my story, as I am a survivor of domestic human sex trafficking. So I was actually raised in Mississauga, to a two-parent household. We are upper middle class family. I am the eldest of four, so I have three younger siblings, two brothers and a sister, and I grew up in a world not wanting or needing for anything. The epitome of a sheltered life. I had some amazing parents that provided me with everything, and I was naive as you could be. Now, school-wise for me was a very difficult experience. I am dyslexic, and I was put into special ed classes when I was in grade 2, and I did not fit in from that point. I was socially ostracized based off my learning disability, and I was in my full flight mode of I was going to prove everybody wrong, but I was being called stupid at school, and I went home and was like, I refuse to be in stupid class anymore. And although my parents would explain to me that that's not what special education is, that is sure the way I felt. And I was, I guess, what we would call these days extremely bullied through school, but bullying wasn't even a thing when I went to school. So I really felt out of shape. But my siblings were my entire life. I do love them still to this day, but they were my entire self. So people called me Mother Michelle, and I was the child you never worried about. My parents didn't worry about me, getting in trouble. Did I have curfews? No, like I had nothing. There was no need to ever worry about a child like Michelle. Michelle was like the poster child. Yeah, like of the golden child, except I didn't do well in school. But besides that, but personally, I didn't fit in anywhere because I wasn't athletic. I wasn't artistic. I wasn't smart. And I just kept on going like, oh, I guess I'm a real failure. If I can focus on making sure my siblings are not failures, they'll have a better life than me. Unfortunately, when I entered high school, my siblings got older, they started getting friends of their own, and suddenly like they didn't want to hang out with their older sister, and I had like empty nest syndrome as like 15 years old. I was like, who was supposed to go and get my nails done with me if my sister's, playing with her friends? She doesn't want to be with me. And I still didn't fit into school, but I was very socially aware. So in my mind, I just wanted to be a wallflower and kind of just coast through life. So I didn't have any friend group or anything of the type. Now, this is at the epicenter of technology coming onto the scene. So like I had a flip phone. I had like the black
Razor.
Yeah, like Motorola Razor. It was hot pink. I thought I was like everything because I had that. My first iPod that I had was like didn't even have color on it. Like it was a black and white screen. Like we're dating myself. Like this was the beginning. So I did have a really good friend in high school and she joined Facebook. I didn't even have a Facebook profile myself. She joined Facebook and people started writing on her wall because this is before even Messenger happened. And some gentlemen approached her and were like, hey, what are you doing on Friday night? She's like, oh, we just go to the mall. So on Friday nights, we used to take the bus and we used to go to the mall. Standard procedure. So these gentlemen were pretty much like, hey, we can drive you home if you want. We're like, perfect. We don't have to take the bus home. Like, this sounds like a great idea. So these men were like taking longer and we moseyed on down to the Taco Bell and we're eating our fries supreme on the curb of the parking lot and a green Lexus pulled up and out popped 3 gentlemen and they were well dressed, like ready to go to the club, like very Rico Suave on the scene. I was immediately impressed. And in my naive little Oakville, Ontario girl mind, I saw them driving a Lexus and I looked in and they had leather seats and I was like, oh, it's not a base model car. So they must have money. And honestly, I really thought that at 15, money was some sort of security. Like bad people wouldn't have money or I don't know what I thought, but I was like, these seem like safe people. Like, oh, do you want to get in the car? We'll drive you. I'm like, yeah. So they were like, okay, get in. And they're like, do you want to just like go out and have some fun for a couple hours? Then we'll take you right home. And that's not Michelle. Like that was not the child that I was. I would never get myself into situations where that could possibly get me in trouble. And it sounded like something my parents would slightly be upset about. But as we were going on the on-ramp to the highway, I just said, you know what? Like, let's just fit in for once. Let's just go with the flow of things. And these gentlemen, they dropped me off just like they said they would. And then nights like this continued throughout probably a 2-month span throughout the summertime. So I met them in May, and throughout the summer months when school was ended, I hung out with them consistently. Now, my friend that I had met them with, she was a lot more street smart than me, more rougher upbringing. And she came up to me actually and said, like, I've got a bad feeling about these guys. But at that point, I was in. Like, you couldn't have told me I belonged for once. I had friends that like communicated with me and wanted me to be around and really like I seemed to fit in for the first time. And that was the best feeling that anyone could have ever given me at 15 years old. So I ignored her and she kind of distanced herself from us, didn't really hang out with us as much anymore. So one day, the one guy that I really seemed to like picked me up from my house, my family home. Nothing out of the normal. We went and picked up one of his friends and we drove to an apartment complex. And they parked in the apartment complex and the guy that I'd been hanging out with all summer was like, hey, go up with my friend. I'll be up soon. Didn't think anything of this. I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I went into one of the apartment buildings with the one gentleman. We went into the elevator up to a designated floor. And when we walked off the elevator, he grabbed me and pulled me into a stairwell that was pretty much adjacent to the elevator. And I was kind of freaked out at this point because I'm like, oh, what the heck is happening? And he says, you're going to go and knock on this door. And I was like, okay, but why? He was just very angry and like asking, I'm like, you're going to come with me, right? This is why are we knocking on random people's doors? Like, whose door is this? Nothing made sense to me. I had no idea what I was just walking myself into. And it's at this moment, he was like, you're going to knock on the door and do whatever the guy says. And I was like, okay, but like, you're coming with me, right? Like, what is this? I have no idea what's happening. This is happening all so fast. And he goes to me, well, if you don't do it, let me show you something. And he pulls out a flip phone again. And these are like 30-second clips because we didn't even have videos that long of me performing different sexual acts throughout those 2 months of the summer that I thought I was having such a great time. And he said, I'll post this on Facebook. I'll send it to your principal, your parents, your siblings, your friends. And I thought that was going to be like socially the end of me. And all I had in my life was being a good girl. And if I didn't have that, then what the heck would I have? So I could not let anybody, and I couldn't grasp what was happening to me at all. So I went and knocked on the door. A middle-aged man opened the door. I performed a sexual act on him. And at the end, he gave me a hug, handed me some cash, and said, like, next time if you loosen up, you'll have more fun. So I exited the apartment. I headed back to the stairwell where the guy was waiting for me, and he grabbed the cash out of my hand and said, did you get the money up front? I said, what? I mean, I didn't even know money was a part of this. And he goes like, first rule, get the money up front. And that was my first experience getting put into the world of sex trafficking. That's called an out call, and that's what they had taken me to, and I was blind to that. I was 15 years old, and I did not really grasp what prostitution really was. Downtown Toronto, I'd seen streetwalkers, and like I'd seen the movie Pretty Woman, but this did not like depict either of those things to me. So I didn't have a name to what just happened. And I assumed like, okay, not safe people. I'm going to go home and I'm going to just not answer my phone and I'm going to delete them off MSN, which is where I was primarily contacting them, and this will go away. And, you know, they tried to get in contact with me. Different handlers called my home phone, like from a private ID. And they said like, hey, like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just want to come out and hang out with us? Like, what happened? And I'm going to, the same thing contemplated in my mind. I was 15. I was like, what the heck was that? These guys are definitely my friends. Like, we were friends. We had all this fun all summer, and I missed them. I was like, oh, I don't belong anymore, and I don't know what's happening, and I feel so confused, and I have no one to talk to, and they're still messaging me. So, like, they can't be mad at me. And, like, you know what? I'm just going to go see them. Like, probably this is on me. I probably don't know what was happening, and I'm going to go meet up with them again. So I actually did voluntarily go out and meet with them again. And they took me to pretty much the exact same similar situation. But at the end of it, it was very much celebrated. They're like, yeah, you did it. Like, let's go and smoke some weed at the park and we can pop open a bottle. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, this seems great. So now I'm in a confused state of like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but like, I really don't want to lose these guys because they are my whole life right now. And they make me feel so good about myself. They made me feel included. I went to school in September after this had happened, way more confident than I had when I left in June. So it was just really confusing to me going on. So I continued on this relationship with these guys at this point until one day they took me to a motel in Mississauga at Dundas and 427 area, these seedy motels. And I walked into one of the rooms and there was other girls there too. And they're like, you're going to work here. And I was like, work? Very weird. I had a part-time job. I worked at a grocery store. That was what I considered work. I was like, okay. And they then said, like, you need to make $1,000 to go home. I said, oh, okay. Again, not knowing what prostitution really was, like, how am I going to make $1,000? And the girl that I was with, we started having conversations. She kind of explaining things to me. Definitely around my age, like a teenager for sure, seemed like a total safe person, was like, got along with her very well. These individuals left us alone in the room, and then we would get knocks on the door and like gentlemen coming and dropping off money and doing sexual acts with them. And I had no idea where these gentlemen were coming from. Like, I had no idea why they were bringing money, how they were. I was like, is this like the mafia? I don't know what this, like, am I watching The Sopranos? Like, I don't know what this is. It's just so foreign for me to talk about now because at 15, I knew everything. It was crazy. I know nothing now, but at 15, I knew everything. But this was like so out of my realm that I couldn't put a name to it. I didn't know what was happening. I wasn't aware people purchased sex. Like, I didn't know that was really a thing that was like mainstream. So I had no idea what was happening to me. So the minute this quota got introduced to me shook up my life. But at the end of that day, it was this praise. They're like, you get to sit in the front seat because you made the most money. I was like, oh my God, I'm like such a good person. Like, look at me. I'm so good at what I do. Like, look at me sitting in the front seat. And it was this pinning us females against each other and bringing them back. Now, some females didn't leave the motel room. Like, they seemed to live there. They had suitcases there and their stuff was there. I got to go home at the end of my making my $1,000. And they did not come to my house every day to come and get me, but they like sporadically would show up and they'd take me to the motel, same motel every single time, and they'd get me to perform these things. And I'm going to be honest, at this point, I don't think I was really fearful for my life. I was just more confused and I was doing something definitely against my will, but for acceptance. Like, I was doing it willingly in a sense because I was so desperate for that acceptance from them, and I didn't really feel unsafe at this point. But then it started amping up, and my first time saying like, oh, I'm not going to do this today. Like, I'm just not going to do it. Or when you're menstruating and they're saying like, you're going to need to put this sponge up your hoo-ha and just go out and do it. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be doing that, or I can't be doing this. Like, I don't want to do this. And then physical force came in. So I had guerrilla style pimps, and they used force to get me to do what they wanted. So I started getting beat all the time, burnt with cigarettes all over my back that would welt. And I was petrified of these men. Like, the good girl that I was always programmed by my parents to follow rules and follow authority. And these guys were just out of the realm. I didn't go through any physical violence growing up in my household. This was like far beyond my realm of normal. I was petrified, and I definitely couldn't tell my parents what was happening because these guys were telling me like, hey, like, you're a bad person, you know, like, you're voluntarily having sex with all these men. Like, you're a whore. I hope you know that you're a hoe. You're a whore. If your parents aren't going to love you anymore, no one's going to believe you of what's happening. And like, the police ain't going to help you. You're just like us, just to let you know. And these words kept playing in my mind. I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot let my parents find out. Like, I just cannot let my parents find out. And the worse and worse it got, and the more I was being physically violated, just in numerous ways, I was becoming super overwhelmed. And I was like, you know what? I got myself into this. I must be able to get myself out. I'm a strong girl. I've been through all these things before. I can surely get myself out. So I started dodging these individuals, and they would show up to my job and they would show up to my school. It got to the point where I would leave my high school and they'd be parked at every exit of the door, like one of their cars, blaring their rap music. And again, I was in it was Oakville. It wasn't a very diverse community. They stood out like a sore thumb. I did not want that attention. So immediately once I saw them, I was like, oh, I'm screwed. I'm just going to go into their car. It was very easy. It's not like I was, get away from me, screaming down the street. It wasn't like this. This was a silent battle that I was going through. No one knew what I was going through. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked like, hey, is something up? Did your behavior change or anything like this? But I would say at that moment when I started getting tired is the huge switch. So that perfect Michelle that would never speak back, never do wrong, that flip. I was now a nightmare child. I was the teenager that all parents are like, please don't let me go through this cycle. I was a monster. I started stealing to get my quota of $1,000 a day. It became made very clear to me, $1,000 is $1,000. Doesn't really matter how you get it. So all my paycheck from my part-time job went to my traffickers at this point. I stole money from my siblings' wallets, from their piggy banks, from my parents' accounts. Like, anyway, honestly, guys, if you had your wallet out here and that was 15-year-old Michelle, would have gone into your wallet when you're sitting right in front of me. I had zero qualms. I was in survival mode. And as the years kept progressing and I was getting more and more deep into this, but nobody knew. And my parents were starting to catch on to this odd behavior I had. And they're like, listen, you need to stop hanging around with these people. They're bad influences. I don't know who these people are, but you got to stop hanging around them. And I said, like, okay, sure. But knowing that that's not that easy. It's not going to be like that, but you just don't get it. So here my parents are trying to make boundaries for me, but they have no idea what I'm going through. I have no respect for authority figures anymore. I am so emotionally gone. I really think this triggered my mental health, because if I was to look back, I would say this is the first time I experienced mental health symptoms, but I didn't know it at this time. That leads to when I was 17 years old, I did try to commit suicide. I did not feel like I had an out to that. And after I had taken a whole bunch of prescription medication of my father's, and I actually went to school during that time, and I gave my friend my SIM card to my phone and the power pack. And I was like, I need to give this to you. And she's like, why? I'm like, I just can't tell you because I thought I was dying at the moment. And I just needed the world to know that everything that I had done was not my fault. And like, they had to see my phone so they knew what was happening to me, because I didn't have the words to say it, but I knew what was happening to me wasn't right. But I just didn't know what it was called. And like, I tried to look online and I couldn't find anything. And I was just like, I got myself in trouble and I got to get myself out. So this was the way. Now, I wasn't successful. And actually my parents took me to the hospital after this attempt, and a nurse said, look, were you doing this for attention? And I said, yes. And my mom was like, no, she's not. Like, something's happening to my daughter. You've got to believe us. And I was like, nope, I was doing it for attention. And they're like, yeah, see, your daughter was doing it for attention. They sent us home. And this is the prevalence. I do not hold anything against her. This is the difference of that education makes. Like, this is why I'm so thankful to be here with you guys today, because that is the difference. It wasn't. I looked online to find a word for what I was going through. There wasn't any. So I went to these authority figures for help. My parents brought me to help until finally one day things were just so spiraling out of control. We were in immediate danger, and I think my parents came to me and said, you're on drugs. And I said, I am not on drugs. So common misconception too is that all traffickers, they use drugs and alcohol to coerce their victims or like get them hooked on drugs. It does happen, absolutely. Not all traffickers. My traffickers were anti that. It costs money and it's bad for business. It's not a good look to have strung out girls going and providing sexual services. A lot of clientele don't like that. So we had a 0 drug and alcohol policy. If I even had a drink, if a client was to bring a bottle of wine and I had a glass of wine, that was something that I would get beat for. Like, we are not allowed to participate in any form of drugs and alcohol. Weed was sometimes allowed if we were smoking with them, but that was it. I was always instructed in my brain that drugs were the lowest of the low, that you cannot do drugs no matter what. Like, you sell drugs to make money off people that do drugs. You do not spend money on drugs. Like, it was drilled into me. So when my parents were like, you're addicted to drugs, I was like, ha ha ha, joke's on you. Yep. Yeah. So they dragged me down to my pediatrician, and this is how crazy. I was still at a pediatrician at this time. They dragged me down to the pediatrician and they got me drug tested, and it came back with just some THC in my system, some marijuana, which I'd already come clean about, and they were floored. So now my parents really were grinding their gears of what's happening, because I wasn't bringing anything new into my house.
And they had no idea.
But the money was gone, right? So they were trying to equate of, she's not buying anything with her money. And I was a shopper before. Like, I love to shop. So like, where is her money going? Why is she stealing money if she doesn't have anything? And now she's not on drugs. Like, we've got to. So my dad sat me down, and I think my dad is the one that kind of started piecing the puzzles together. And he was like, you got to go on a drive with your mom. So, and I always say, like, cars are great places to have conversations with any youth that you might work with. I mentor youth myself, and I love the car. If you can get a youth in the car, the lack of eye contact is so great to have open conversations with. I strongly recommend this tactic.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So my mom used that tactic with me, took me out in the car. I didn't have to look her in the eyes. And remember, I didn't have the words to what, and youth these days, they might still not have the words to what's happening. So I kind of was just like, these guys are making me do things for money, and I like trying to stop, but it's really hard. And like, they're just threatening me. And she was like, oh my gosh, we're going to the police. So my parents took me to the police, and I told them the whole story. Now, I should have backed up. I missed a key component on the money missing and why they thought I was on drugs. So about $20,000 to $50,000 had been missing from my parents' account, because I had given my traffickers my parents' debit card that was on their desk in their office. Wow. Now, unbeknownst to me, this account was their joint account that had their mortgage and a line of credit on it. So my dad hadn't noticed the money going, because he didn't notice till he went to the bank to close down his mortgage, because he had made its final payment. And they're like, yeah, you just have to clear up the line of credit. So he came to my mom and was like, why are you spending money on the line of credit? And she's like, I haven't spent money on the line of credit. And so they came to me and they said, like, if you took this money, we're going to the bank and they're going to have you on camera. But I didn't. My traffickers did. So I was thinking in my head, please, because this is my way out. Yeah. This is God coming to me and telling me, like, this is my out. Like, I'm being saved right now. I'm not going to have to tell anybody what I've done or what I've gone through. And they're going to realize, these guys, and they're going to get arrested for stealing. And they're going to be out of my life, because they're going to be in jail for stealing, because stealing is a super bad crime. And you're going to go to jail for that. Like, that's still genuinely my thinking and philosophy at the time, was like, ooh, they're bad thieves and they're going to get it. So we went to the police and we explained the story to the police, and the police said, okay, but your daughter gave them the debit card and the password. And my mom's like, yes. So they made me bring my mom into the interview room and explain in front of her everything that I had told them. And I had told them every detail that I just told you guys, and every in-between detail. And the police turned to my mom and said, so what's going to happen is we're going to have to charge your daughter, because she's the one that gave the card and the PIN number. And then we can go from there. And my mom was like, are you guys crazy? My daughter's a victim of a crime. We're not going to charge her. Yeah. And they're like, well, the best we can suggest is you change your phone numbers and that you use the buddy system. So that's what we did. We went home, we changed all the phone numbers, and I was not
Jeez.
allowed to do anything by myself. Like, my siblings had to walk to the convenience store with me. I can walk to school by myself. Like, I was watched like a hawk 24/7, and I was irritated. But like, I had no faith in getting better. I still believe these guys were going to come back around, but I got a job at Tim Hortons working night shift, and I'd been working there for a couple months, and then finally I convinced my mom, like, please let me walk to work. Like, I can walk to work myself through this Oakville neighborhood. Calm down. Nothing is going to happen to me. So I was doing this for about like 2-3 weeks until one day I was cutting across the park like I did every single night when I walked to work in my white Tim Hortons uniform, and I see some headlights come on, and I was like, okay. And then I saw a gentleman getting out of the car and approaching me, and I immediately recognized some of them, and some of them I did not recognize. And they approached me and they started calling me a rat, and they're like, where are your friends? Where are your friends? Where are your friends? Referring to the police. And guess what? My friends weren't there to save me, and they started beating me profusely right there. I fell to the ground. I'm scraped. I'm bruised. One of the individuals actually like punctured my abdomen with his keys, like it stabbed right through me. So now I'm covered in blood. And they said, like, we're coming back, so you better not say anything. And at this point I was like, well, I can't go home because I can't go to my mom. Like, my mom's gonna make me go to the police, and like, look what happened when I went to the police. These guys are right. They said the police weren't going to believe me, and they were going to treat me like a whore, and they were not going to do anything. And now I'm in a worse position because I'm beaten and bruised on the floor of a field. And so in my logic, I thought, I have to go to Tim Hortons at this point. It's safer than going home. So I continued to walk, and they were like, what the heck happened to you? Like, you've got to get help. And I was like, no, I just simply fell on a stick, and it's going to be fine. So they immediately called my mom, and my mom immediately called the police. And at this point, I was completely uncooperative with the police. I did not see them as an ally at all. I saw them as my enemy, and that was pretty much it. And that was the end for me. My parents actually separated this time. They moved, my dad moved out of the family house, and this made my traffickers worse fearful of my father to an extent. So this made them rapidly approach our house. Like, they would wait right outside my driveway for me. They started threatening to take my sister. They actually followed my brother home from his elementary school, pointed a gun at him, and made him get in the car and told him if he doesn't get me out of the house, that they were going to come in the house. So we were living in constant fear. So at this time, my traffickers, which I didn't call them my traffickers at the time, I told them these guys, but they came up to me and told me about something called a buyout fee, saying if I could come up with $10,000 that they would leave me alone, I could buy out of the game. I don't know what the game was, but I knew I didn't want to be part of the game anymore, so I wanted that out. So I started stealing money, saving up any type of money I could from my part-time jobs, whatever. And then one day I got caught stealing money from my mom, and she goes, what is up with you? Like, what are these? Is it still happening? I'm like, Mom, listen, I have our solution, our out. All we need is $10,000, and then they're going to leave me alone. And she was like, honestly, like, she was at a loss. So she got together $10,000, went, and we met with them. We dropped it off, and they did go away for a couple months, but then they came back with a vengeance. And it was at this time where things were so volatile and unsafe. Like, it was actually super unsafe. Now, my mom came up to me with a list of resources, and she said, like, Michelle, I hate to do this, but I have to keep my other children safe. And it's either you have to go get help for what's happening, or you can no longer live in this house. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know if any other parents have gotten alarm systems to keep their child in the house, but like, my parents did everything they could to safeguard me. We had a whole alarm system set up for inside, like, to keep me inside. And I would go through like these little tiny windows. They had no idea how I was getting in and out of the house. Like, they had professionals come in, like, how is this girl getting out of this house? Because like, it was so life and death to me, and there was nothing they were getting through to me. So this was a hard ultimatum for my mom to make. And my poor mother, I think, was distraught by this. So I'm a girl that my parents used to kick me out too. Like, they didn't know what to do. I got kicked out of the house, and I would go and like sleep in outhouses at parks because I couldn't let my friends know at school what was happening to me. So it's not like I could go stay at a friend's house. And my other only option was to stay at the motel all night. Then I'd have to work all night like the motel girls. And that's what I called the girls that didn't get to go home. So the ones that were so exploited that they actually lived, the motel was their home. And I was like, I cannot be a motel girl. I cannot do that to myself. I have to find a different way. So while I was sitting in that park, I was like, great, I'm looking at another night where I'm going to be sleeping in that outhouse right beside me. Or I could go to the motel, which doesn't seem like a good option. So F it. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna call these numbers. And I called the numbers and I was like, what can you do for me? It sounds like you can do nothing. And usually they'd be like, can you please not use that tone? Can you please not use swear words? Can you please treat us with equity, dignity, and respect? I'm like, screw you, no. And like, I was just a miserable child. Like nobody wants to help me and nobody deserves to be degraded over the phone. Like I could totally understand their perspectives. But I called Walk With Me Canada, and this woman, Mia Nagy, answered the phone. She had this thick accent. She's like, I'm like, what can you do for me? She's like, honey, do you need minutes for your cell phone? We can get you a hot food. We can get you clothes. I'm like, I actually have the newest iPhone and it's on a plan. So I don't need minutes for my phone. So it sounds to me like you can do absolutely nothing for me. So then I called my mom and said, Mom, I did what you said. I called everyone on the list and no one's going to help me. And she's like, Michelle, I highly doubt that. So I called back every number and most people told me like, when you calm down and like you can act like an adult, we'll help you. And I was like, well, screw you now. That's never going to happen. So the only person that was willing to help me after my whole first spiel was Mia Nagy from Walk With Me Canada. So she actually came to my house and met me at the park at like 2 a.m. And then we went to my house and my mom followed me. She's like, do you want to go and talk to me in the car? And I looked at my mom like, Mom, have you lost your mind? You're going to let me go with this crazy lady with this thick European accent? Like, hello, we're trying to get away from trouble. Why are we going stranger danger, Mom? This doesn't sound right. So my mom like following us behind us in her car the whole time. And this lady's like, do you know something like this happened to me? It's called human trafficking. She's like, I bet these guys make you do this, 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 and this. I'm like, my God. That is what's happening to me. She's like, yeah, it's called human trafficking. I was like, what's human trafficking? She was like, it's when like you're being exploited basically. And she gave me a name to it. She's like, do you want to go to the police station? They have a room that has couches and soft chairs and we can just talk. And I was like, hell no, we're not going to a police station. Like I've had the worst luck. But this woman was just so like, I just trusted her. I can't explain it in any other way. It's just like she spoke to me from my realm and she got it and no one else got it. And even the people that were actively trying to help me, like my poor mother did everything. There was nothing my mom could have done better. And I knew she loved me during this whole time. But this woman got me, like something that my mom just simply couldn't. So I ended up going to the police station and that led into the next day, me going and doing a statement, and my whole life was turned upside down. I was taken to a safe house. My family was told, like, it's probably the best idea if you get out of the country while we're doing an investigation for safety purposes. My mom had to move homes. I had to move my house. Like, I never lived a day with my family after that. Like, the day that I went to the police station, I never got to live back in my family home again. Like it was just done. Like my whole life was just done from that point. And I started this new life and they had an investigation going off of these guys. I had, just as luck would have it, I got this job, a full-time job with this company. They'd offered me a job in Burlington. My dad got me a condo there that I was living off of. And I was like replaying this life, like this fairy tale, like this girl that got over her trauma, but I hadn't, because that's the problem is like unresolved trauma will follow you and you can't escape it. And I just felt like broken and alone. So I went through all this. I am not going to lie, even though I had support systems in place, I was not on my healing journey at all. I didn't have wraparound services. A lot of people viewed, because my family had money, that I wasn't offered any services to me because I was viewed as coming from a good background. So once they took me out of it, I didn't need any more help. Like, oh, problem gone. Like, she's good. And I just wasn't until like I even decided to go back to the sex trade myself. I was like, well, I'm broke and it's really hard living on your own. And I feel so segregated from my family now. And I feel like I've just been disposed to the side, and the world's using me as this poster child for doing such a good job. Like, look what Michelle can do. She's managed to like rebuild her life after this horrible thing, and woohoo, Michelle. And I actually went back into the sex trade voluntarily, and then I got re-victimized. I got another trafficker and I went through the whole same cycle again, and that one ended in him beating me so hard that I actually had a miscarriage. And if you thought that would scare me enough to exit, well, no, my mental health was so bad. I have bipolar 1 and I did have borderline personality, but I'm now cleared from those symptoms because now I am on my healing journey. But like it was like I was just left with nothing. So even after that situation, I went back to the sex trade and I went and looked for a trafficker, and I ended up in a terrible, bad domestic violence situation, but in the sex trade. And I was up into the sex trade until I'm coming up in February on 4 years of being out of the sex trade, but I was a lot primarily in it voluntarily. And I have a hard time with the word voluntarily in the sex trade because I can personally say that I never voluntarily wanted to be in the sex trade. Yeah. I didn't see any other options. I didn't have the proper mental health or counseling services or a safe home to go to. I was living out of hotel rooms. So that's why all these organizations and like for yourselves to educate and share and get this talk out, this changes lives. I can tell you, I have sat with myself and said, oh my gosh, what if someone came into my school and did an assembly on human trafficking? Because we had it about the Holocaust and we had it about this and we had it about that. I'm like, if that happened, maybe I would have gone and talked to that person and said like, hey, I think something's happening to me, but I didn't know what was happening to me. Yeah. That's why having these open, honest conversations is so, so crucial. And I am so grateful for being where I am now. And it took like a whole community and I've been lucky. And I also have a lot more resources than the typical person. I come from a good family. Yeah. I had a lot of building blocks in my life prior to my exploitation that have skyrocketed me off. I also had an immense amount of luck, but I can tell you that my boss at the restaurant I work for, I work at a Montana's, and my boss took a chance on me, giving me my first job in so long after being in the sex trade. And I went into that interview petrified. And she said, are you a hard worker? And I'm like, yes. She's like, do you have experience? I said, absolutely not. She's like, have you ever worked in a restaurant? I said, no. She's like, do you cook a lot? I'm like, nope. She's like, do you want to be a cook? I'm like, I guess so. And I was so scared going into this. I sleep with random men every day and just parade around my body. But going into this restaurant was the most terrifying moment in my life. But this woman gave me a chance. And then I actually became the general manager of the restaurant through work. And that's why, like, when we talk about education and stuff, I have no education, but I've made it. And it's not just because of me. It is. It's like, it's resilience, my hard work and dedication, but it's also from my community. Yeah. So I was exploited from Oakville and now I live in Burlington, but Halton, Hamilton area is my home. I was exploited here the most in Halton and Hamilton. I've worked in every single motel in Halton, Hamilton. But this is where I choose to now call my home, and I'm going to be raising my family here and having my own life here, and it's going to change the narrative. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to come and share my story because I'm so dedicated into preventative measures, and I want to feel safe in my community. And I also want to let every trafficker know that you're not welcome here and to get out. Like, we're not going to welcome this. Right. And if it will start with us today that we're not going to welcome it, we can get this trend to go on. And the more we can educate and the more we can spread the words, we'll stop exploitation from happening. We'll allow members that are currently being exploited to have their chance to be a Michelle and escape and start their lives. And we'll also have safer communities for everybody. And that's all we can ask for in this grand scheme of things. So I really appreciate you guys giving me the time to share my story today because it really means the world to me.
Absolutely. We're just so, we
are so grateful. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. The whole episode title is Traffic Stop. Like, we want trafficking to stop. I do have some follow-up questions, and I think this is so important. Specifically hearing your story, understanding that there was no words that you could use to describe what was going on in your life. And I can't help but also think that there are young people currently, like right now, who have no idea, or like they don't know what to call it. Or if they do have an idea, they don't know really how to explain it or where to go for help. So if one of the things we want to do with every single podcast is give tools to like parents and educators. So the question I have for you is, what tools can parents and educators use, or what resources can they go to, or even what language or conversations can they have with young people if they feel like a young person or a teenager or somebody that they know might be in danger of trafficking? What are some things that they can do to have those preventative measures?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing is educate yourself first, because there are red flag signs. So usually during the grooming process of exploitation, you're going to see these individuals, and especially if somebody has come from like the foster care system or they live in poverty and suddenly they're coming with designer bags, or they're getting their hair and nails done and you don't know where they would have come up with that money from, or these new things are coming in. If they have a new group of friends, if they have a new cell phone, especially if you have provided your kid a cell phone and they come and they're like, oh, because I wanted a better cell phone or whatever. It seems like very legitimate reason. These are all major red flags that traffickers use during the grooming process. So get yourself educated on what traffickers do during the grooming so you can spot those red signs, so you can have those dialogues. I mentioned it before. One of the things my mom did was talk to me in the car. Having a car is a great way. If you want to engage in community services, if that's a mentorship program, get your kids into a part-time job. I cannot tell you how many kids come to my office and spill their whole hearts out to me because if you can be, and that goes to employers too, if you are employing teenagers or young adults in your community, you have the obligation as a manager. It's not just a business. You know you're paying those kids low, especially when you're paying them student wages below minimum wage. You have a duty to be a responsible employer, and you are an extension of a guardianship to them. When they're in your building, that you should be a safe place for them to come to. That's what I try to instill in my workplace personally. But employers, be there, because get your kids a part-time job. Kids feel on equal playing fields at part-time jobs. Kids that don't necessarily excel well in school can do extremely well in a part-time job. I strongly recommend getting a part-time job and expanding your child's safe community. You need to have safe people for your child because they're not going to like you all the time, and that you have to be comfortable with just acknowledging that, and don't let them go to a trafficker. So you set up the stage for your child. Now, if you do think somebody is being trafficked, you've got to be straight with them, because if they are currently being, especially if it's past the grooming stages and they're in active exploitation, their BS meter is going to be off the chart. Don't try to fiddle around with it. Be direct with them and use harsh language. Is someone forcing you to perform sexual acts for money? Because do you know that that's called human trafficking? And do you know that you've done nothing wrong, that there's actually people that groom them? And like, I want you to get help in whatever way makes you feel safe. How would you feel safe? Can I make you even just feel safe for one night? Don't try to solve their whole life problem. Can I provide a safe space? Somebody that once said to me was, when I was then in active exploitation, and my ED at the company I work for now, but she was my mentor at the time. And she used to message me from my ads on Backpage. And she'd be like, I hope it's not creepy, but I'm just sending you a message and I hope you're well. And moments like that, I was like, okay, I'm a person. Someone still loves me. Someone still cares. I can't talk back to her right now, but like, she didn't know how much that meant to me at the time. So things like that, like reaching out to people and being super real and honest. Like, I know this is happening to you and it's happening to a lot of other people, and we can get you help. And if you're scared, we can get you help.
Well, even the fact that like your mentor was messaging you on the websites or like apps and stuff that you were using, and just like, I'm coming into your space. You don't need to come into mine.
You don't need to come into your space.
I'll come into yours.
And you know what? Like, authority figures are sometimes very overwhelming when you're in this, because traffickers will hone that in, that like, you cannot trust these authority figures, especially the police. The police are a huge asset. Obviously, I would strongly recommend going to the police, and the police have so much further training than what I shared in my story. Like, that's very false to leave it off as the police are not informed. There's so many trainings, and like Hamilton police are fantastic. Like, they're fantastic, but it doesn't always have to be the police first. We have the Canadian National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have amazing supports. Try like a peer support program, whether like where they can connect with their peers. Maybe that makes the difference. Remember that this is all individualized, and it has to be individualized because they've had their identity taken away from them and they're being told what to do. So you've got to give them a little leeway. And sometimes the best thing you can do during active exploitation is providing a safe bed to sleep in, a warm meal, clean, warm clothes, and maybe they go. It's a revolving door. It takes multiple times. But if you can be that solid person that they can come to consistently, like, you're going to be making a huge difference.
So one of the things that you shared in your story is that the person who broke through to you was somebody who had been through it themselves. So with restorations and like the things in the work that you do, if a person or a parent or educator or even somebody, even a teenager who might listen to this podcast is looking for like, I need someone to talk to who just understands. Is that something that Restoration
Yes,
provides, and how can they
do.
connect? Yeah.
Yes. So my colleague Sasha and I, we run our peer support program. So you can contact us directly. I hope you guys can include a link. You can send us an email, give us a phone call. We're available. We are peer support. We work outside of 9 to 5 hours. We also know that crisis happens out of 9 to 5 hours. We are not an emergency line, but we will get back to you as soon as possible. And it's in a super casual way that you can approach it. And we are peer led, like they lead us, and we're just trying to bridge gaps for them. In our peer support program, we have one-on-one supports that we offer, as well as group supports, and there's some of them are social in nature, some of them are educational in nature. It goes across the board. We would love to see peer support. I'll be honest, we're so grateful for Restorations to give us this platform to have this, and another former colleague of mine, she actually developed the program, and this was her baby, and she did a fantastic job because I live, sleep, and breathe by our missions and values that she created. And she's just such an amazing human being. I love her to death. But the three of us have poured our soul into this, and Restorations has given us the platform. I will be honest that collaboration is really hard for us here at Peer Support. So spreading the word out even to organizations that we are here, and we have a great asset because we don't have red tape that you guys have. We have this casual approach that we can use, and we're not trying to replace service providers because we're not experts in the field. We're here to help you guys bridge gaps. So any service providers out there, educators, police officers that would like to work with us or think they have clients that would benefit from speaking with us, we can definitely make those interactions too. It doesn't have to be something. We're casual. We're going to meet everybody where they're at. That's our purpose for being here, and that's really why we strive to be. So
that's amazing. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. All of the links that were mentioned, they'll be in the description for this show. This is a very important conversation, and thank you for coming on the show and hopefully being a launching pad for definitely, you've given us as a program a lot to think about, is adding new material into our own program as we go into schools and churches and youth organizations and talk to people about the reality of the culture that we live in. So thank you sincerely. And we look forward to building a partnership with you here with the S.H.A.R.E program with Atwell, and it's going to be awesome. Anything to add, Kassia?
I think you said it, Carl. Just thank you for coming, for sharing your story, and this was really good.
Well, again, I know that this was a longer podcast. If you're listening out there, or if you're watching online and you need some help, feel free to reach out. This is a safe space, and that is the whole point of having these conversations, is to provide a safe space and to let you know that there is hope. There is a way that you can break out of the cycle of abuse and of trauma, and there are people who are actually willing to help and listen to your story. So thank you, Michelle, for sharing your story. We hope that you guys will see you in the next episode here on the S.H.A.R.E podcast. And as always,
don't forget to share.